A cheap strip of cloudy office tape stretched across the glass plate on my door, holding down a sheet of printer paper that fluttered slightly every time the air conditioner kicked on. My name, Vera Collins, was hidden underneath it, like something the company suddenly felt embarrassed about. The replacement name was typed in bold, Kyle Benton. They'd even spelled it wrong the first time and scratched out the extra letter with a pen. I stood there for a moment, my coffee still warm in my hand, staring at 19 years of work erased by a piece of paper that probably came out of the break room printer. I didn't need anyone to explain what had happened, but I really want to know this. Where are you hearing this story from? What's the temperature where you live right now? If this moment sounds familiar to you, consider subscribing, because every new subscriber helps these stories reach more people than we think, people who might need them, immediately afterwards. A young operations manager I barely recognized hurried down the hallway toward me, holding a tablet like it was a shield. "Vera, HR asked me to let you know your access has been disabled. They'll escort you out shortly." Escort. Like I was some kind of threat. I glanced back at the paper covering my door. "Kyle Benton," I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "He's taking over regulatory operations." I almost laughed. Kyle Benton had joined the company 6 months ago, fresh out of a business school program that probably taught him more about venture capital than federal compliance law. Meanwhile, I had spent 19 years keeping this company alive. Regulatory operations wasn't glamorous work. No one applauded it. But it meant I handled every operating license, every certification renewal, every federal compliance filing that allowed this company to legally function in 3 states. Without those approvals, the entire operation stopped. Apparently, the new leadership thought otherwise. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Evan Mercer, the man the board hired to modernize operations. He smiled like a consultant presenting a slide deck. "Vera, your contributions have been appreciated," he said smoothly. "But regulatory operations is outdated." Then he leaned back in his chair. "Your license is no longer essential to the way we operate." I nodded politely, placed my badge on the table, and kept one quiet thought to myself. The company doesn't own the license. I do. This is a fictional story inspired by real workplace experiences, with some elements enhanced by AI to make it more vivid. I hope it keeps you engaged, but if you're listening while tired, take a moment to rest and take care of yourself too. The strange thing about humiliation is how quickly it turns into observation. By the time I stepped out of Evan Mercer's office, the sting had already settled into something colder, quieter. Pain fades faster when your brain starts asking questions. Evan Mercer had arrived 3 weeks earlier with the kind of resume boards fall in love with: Stanford MBA, strategy consulting, a reputation for modernizing legacy operations. He wore sharp suits, spoke in polished phrases, and filled conference rooms with words that sounded impressive until you listened closely. Agility, streamlining, operational velocity. According to Evan, the company had been trapped for years inside outdated structures. Regulatory oversight, he said, was one of the biggest obstacles to growth. Compliance, he told the leadership team during his second week, is just a framework problem. Most of it can be automated. I had been sitting quietly at the end of that long glass table, taking notes while people nodded along. Then Evan said the sentence that stayed with me. No system should rely on one person. Around the room, heads nodded again. It sounded logical, clean, efficient. But across the table, Lisa Grant, the company's general counsel, didn't nod. She frowned slightly. The way lawyers do when something technically correct still feels dangerously wrong. I remembered watching her fingers pause on her legal pad. At the time, I almost spoke up. Almost. Instead, I stayed quiet, because 2 years earlier, I had already explained everything in writing. I sent the board a memo outlining the licensing structure that kept our facilities legal in 3 states. One line mattered more than the rest. The operating license was issued to Vera Collins, and it wasn't transferable. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. No one spoke. Two interns stood near the door pretending to scroll through their phones, while a middle manager kept glancing at the floor numbers like he was waiting for the moment to escape. When the doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out without looking back. I didn't go to my desk. I didn't collect the framed certificate on the wall, the small plant by the window, or the stack of binders that had followed me through almost 2 decades of regulatory work. 19 years. And it had taken them less than 30 minutes to erase me from the system. Outside, the air felt sharper than usual. Across the street, the small cafe where I often grabbed coffee during audit weeks was already busy with the afternoon crowd. I walked in, ordered a cappuccino, and chose the table near the window that faced the office building I had just left. From there, I could see the glass entrance clearly. People were still walking in and out, completely unaware that the quiet foundation holding the company together had just been removed. For a few minutes, I simply sat there. The pain arrived first, slow and heavy. Not anger, at least not yet. Just the hollow realization that nearly 20 years of work could be dismissed with a rehearsed speech about modernization. Then the decision followed. I opened my laptop. The company hadn't disabled my credentials yet. That didn't surprise me. System access always lagged behind HR decisions. I typed the familiar address of the state regulatory portal and logged in. The dashboard appeared instantly. License category, primary operating certification holder, Vera Collins. I had seen that page thousands of times over the years, while filing renewal reports and compliance updates. But today, something else caught my eye. A small option near the bottom of the screen, voluntary license revocation. I clicked it. A warning message appeared in red text. If revoked, all dependent facilities will enter immediate non-compliance under state statute. My reflection stared back at me from the laptop screen for a moment. Through the cafe window, my former office tower stood tall and confident, its glass walls shining in the afternoon sun. They believed they had just removed a bureaucratic inconvenience. Slowly, I moved the cursor and clicked. The cappuccino was still too hot when the first ripple reached the building I had just left behind. I remember watching the steam curl slowly above the cup while the afternoon sun reflected off the glass tower across the street. From where I sat, everything looked perfectly normal. Inside the company, however, the system had already begun to move. It started quietly in the legal department. An automated email arrived from the state regulatory office, flagged with the standard compliance header most people ignored until something went wrong. Subject verification of named operator. The message landed in the inbox of Lisa Grant, the company's general counsel. Lisa had always been the careful one, the person who read the fine print while everyone else skimmed the headlines. She opened the email expecting another routine confirmation request. Instead, she felt something tighten in her chest. The message was short, clinical, written in the neutral tone regulators use when they already know the answer. Please confirm the current active named operator for all registered facilities operating under certification code PR4182. Lisa turned toward her second monitor and opened the internal licensing registry. The record appeared immediately. Operator license holder Vera Collins status revoked. For a moment, she simply stared at the screen, convinced she had misread it. Then she refreshed the page. The result didn't change. Across the street, I took another slow sip of coffee. Back in the office, Lisa grabbed her phone and dialed Evan Mercer. He answered on the second ring. "Evan, we have a problem," she said. "What kind of problem?" he replied casually. "The operator certification is gone." There was a short pause on the line, followed by a faint laugh. "Then assign someone else," Evan said. "That's what we do with every other role." Lisa closed her eyes briefly, already feeling the weight of the situation settle into place when she spoke again. Her voice had turned very calm. "We can't." A longer silence followed. Across the street, I watched the reflection of clouds sliding slowly over the office windows. The system had just issued its first warning, and no one inside the building yet understood what that meant. If you think I was right to revoke the operator license and let the system enforce the law they ignored, leave a 1 in the comments because when people speak up, even with something small, it shows that quiet decisions like this don't go unnoticed. The first real panic didn't start in operations. It started in legal, while I sat quietly in the cafe across the street. Lisa Grant was standing in the middle of the legal department with my name glowing on her monitor. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she opened her email archive and searched for something she hadn't thought about in 2 years. The memo. I remembered writing it late one evening after a regulatory audit, when the board had begun discussing automation strategies. It was 5 pages long, dry and technical, the kind of document executives usually skim once and forget. Lisa opened it slowly now. The heading read Operational Licensing Dependency Internal Advisory. Halfway down the page was the section she was looking for, Statute 14.6b. The language was clear enough for anyone willing to read it. The named operator must be individually certified under state authority. The license cannot be transferred or reassigned to another employee. And if the certification is revoked for any reason, all dependent facilities immediately lose operating compliance until a new license holder is approved. Lisa's stomach dropped. Down the hall, Evan Mercer was still moving confidently through the office, giving instructions as if nothing had happened. When Lisa stepped into his office, she held the printed memo in her hand. "You need to read this," she said. Evan barely glanced at it. "This is just legal structure," he replied. "We'll update the system." "That's not how this works," Lisa said. Evan leaned back in his chair, irritated. "Then override the system. Assign another credential. Within minutes." The IT department was trying exactly that. Across multiple terminals, they attempted to reroute the licensing chain to another executive account. The system rejected every attempt. Credential bound to state PKI infrastructure. Transfer request denied. One engineer tried again with elevated permissions. The same message appeared. License holder verification required. Then something else happened. While IT struggled to bypass the certification, the compliance server completed the next step in its automated protocol. A status change had already been recorded. The report was transmitted directly to the state regulatory network. Back in the office, no one realized the message had already left the building. But sitting by the cafe window, watching the afternoon traffic pass slowly, I knew exactly what came next. The system didn't take long to respond. Compliance software is designed to move quietly, but once a trigger activates, it doesn't hesitate. By the time the message left the server, the next step had already begun somewhere else. The first inspectors arrived. I didn't see them directly. Of course, I was still sitting at the cafe window, watching the morning traffic shift into late morning calm. But the information travels fast inside corporate systems, and a few minutes later, my phone lit up with a familiar internal alert thread I hadn't yet been removed from. The largest facility the company operated was in Bakersfield. That was where the inspectors went first. 2 state compliance officers walked through the front gate carrying clipboards and official envelopes stamped with the state seal. The plant manager, a woman named Tiffany who had handled operations there for nearly a decade, met them in the main reception area. At first, she thought it was a routine visit. Then, one of the inspectors unfolded a document and read the notice aloud. Under State Statute 14.6b, the facility's operating certification has been suspended pending verification of a valid named operator. Tiffany blinked. "I'm sorry." Suspended when she asked. Effective immediately. Those 2 words changed everything. Machines that had been running continuously for years were ordered to stop. Production lines slowed, then shut down completely while supervisors tried to understand what was happening. Within minutes, Tiffany was on the phone with headquarters. Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "They're shutting us down," she said, "right now. They say our operating license is invalid." Inside the corporate office, phones began ringing all at once, but the real panic started when the second call came in, then the third. 2 additional facilities, one in Santa Fe and another in Columbus reported identical visits from state inspectors carrying the same suspension order. 3 facilities, 3 shutdowns. Across the street, I watched a delivery truck pass slowly in front of the office building. Inside that building, confusion was rapidly turning into fear, because by then, someone had finally realized the inspections were not random. They were connected, and they had all started at exactly the same time, once the first facility shut down. The rest of the system didn't collapse slowly. It collapsed all at once. The shutdown orders moved through the company like falling dominoes. Production lines that had been running 24 hours a day went silent within minutes. Supervisors were ordered to power down equipment, secure inventory, and halt all outgoing shipments until the licensing issue could be resolved. No one knew how long that would take. Inside headquarters, the situation spiraled into chaos. Phones rang constantly. Department heads moved quickly between conference rooms, while messages flooded the internal communication channels. Operations teams tried to understand which facilities were still legally allowed to function and which ones had already been frozen by the regulators. The answer was becoming painfully clear. None of them were. Government clients began calling next. Several of the company's largest contracts depended on uninterrupted regulatory certification. The moment the facilities lost their operator license, those contracts automatically triggered compliance reviews. Within an hour, multiple clients had suspended service agreements. Public relations was already scrambling to prepare a statement, but no one could agree on what explanation would sound believable. The situation wasn't a technical error. It wasn't a temporary outage. It was a legal shutdown in the finance department. The numbers appeared quickly. Projected revenue loss for the day alone had already climbed into the tens of millions of dollars. And every additional hour the facilities remained inactive pushed the damage higher. Across the street, I watched the building quietly absorb the shock. The windows still reflected the afternoon sky. From the outside, nothing looked different, but inside, the atmosphere had changed completely. Confusion had turned into fear, because someone had finally connected the events unfolding across 3 states with one very specific decision made earlier that morning. My phone buzzed on the cafe table. I glanced down and saw the name on the screen, Evan Mercer. He called again 30 seconds later, and then again. I turned the phone face down beside my coffee and let it ring. For the first time that day, the silence felt entirely under my control. By the time the crisis reached its peak, the building across the street had stopped pretending everything was under control. From my table near the window, I could see people moving quickly inside the glass lobby, executives pacing, assistants rushing between elevators, security speaking urgently into radios. The chaos had reached the board, and that meant only one person left to call. Daniel Whitmore, chairman of the board, was on a flight from New York when the first shutdown report reached him. By the time his plane landed, 3 facilities had already been suspended, and regulators were demanding immediate explanations. He drove straight from the airport to headquarters, inside the executive conference room. The atmosphere had completely changed from the confident meeting that morning. Department heads sat stiffly around the table, while state inspectors stood near the wall preparing official suspension documents. No one was talking. The door opened without warning. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked into the room and looked around at the people who were now avoiding eye contact. The inspectors paused, waiting. Whitmore set his briefcase on the table and turned slowly toward Evan Mercer. "What exactly is happening here?" he asked. Evan attempted to explain. His voice sounded thinner now, stripped of the confident tone he used earlier that morning. "There's been a licensing complication," he said. "Legal and IT are working on reassignment." Whitmore stared at him for several seconds without speaking. Across the room, Lisa Grant stood quietly with a printed document in her hands. Whitmore finally exhaled and asked the question that froze the entire room. "Who exactly did we just fire?" No one answered immediately. Evan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lisa stepped forward before he could try again. She placed the memo on the table and looked directly at the chairman. Her voice was calm, but there was no softness in it. "We didn't fire a department," she said. She tapped the document once. "We fired the license." For a moment, no one moved. Then Whitmore turned his eyes slowly back to Evan, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. From my seat across the street, I couldn't hear the conversation in the boardroom, but I could imagine exactly how it unfolded. Corporate disasters follow a pattern, and I had spent 19 years studying the rules that govern this one. Inside that room, Daniel Whitmore held the memo I had written 2 years earlier, the one explaining how the company's operating authority depended on a single licensed operator. Me. He read it carefully while the executives around the table remained silent. By now, everyone understood the truth. The shutdowns weren't caused by a technical failure. They were caused by a decision, and that decision belonged to Evan Mercer. When Whitmore finished reading, he placed the memo on the table and looked straight at him. "You removed the one person keeping us legal," he said. Evan tried to defend himself. I imagine he used the same confident language he had used that morning, talking about modernization and operational efficiency. But none of that matters when the law is involved. Whitmore listened for only a moment before lifting one hand. "That's enough." He turned to the head of security. "Disable his access." Within minutes, Evan's credentials vanished from the system. His laptop access disappeared, followed by his executive permissions across the company network. Security escorted him from the executive floor shortly after. No announcement was made. No public explanation followed. In corporate culture, silence can be the clearest verdict of all. Across the street, I watched someone being led through the lobby toward the exit. I didn't need confirmation. Evan Mercer had just learned what happens when arrogance collides with law. By late afternoon, the chaos downtown had faded into quiet distance. I was sitting in my garden, a cup of tea warming my hands, when my phone finally buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Evan. It was the chairman's assistant. Her voice sounded careful, almost polite. "The board hoped I might consider returning temporarily, a consulting arrangement," she said. "They needed help restoring the operating license and stabilizing the facilities." I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I gave the only answer that made sense. "You'll need a new license." There was a pause on the line. "And this time," I added calmly, "read the law first." I ended the call, set the phone down, and took another sip of tea. For the first time in years, everything felt quiet again, and finally, it felt like peace. There's a quiet lesson in what happened that day. Respect in the workplace is not only about titles or loud voices. Sometimes it lives in the unseen work that keeps everything standing. When that work is dismissed, the consequences can speak louder than any argument. I often wonder what each of you would have done in that moment. Would you walk away quietly, or stand your ground in your own way? Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Your voice matters here. And if this story meant something to you, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it. A simple action from you can help this story reach someone else who might need the reminder that dignity and knowledge still have power. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.